Adam Mordecai was born in Pennsylvania in 1755, but he became the first United States citizen to settle in what would become Montgomery County, Alabama. That was in 1785. He was a Jewish veteran of the Revolutionary War and lived and married among the Creek Indians, and he established a trading house for skins, furs, and medicinal barks. In 1802, he installed the first cotton gin in Alabama, where he ginned both his and the local Indians' cotton until the Indians burned his equipment. Mordecai was friendly, independent, and he died in 1849. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks boarded a bus in Montgomery, but instead of going to the back of the bus, which was designated for the African Americans, she sat at the front. The bus began to fill up with white passengers, and the bus driver requested that Rosa give up her seat and move to the back in order to make room for the white passengers. But she refused on the principle of the matter, and that began one of the largest social movements in America's history. Others followed her lead. Rosa moved along with her family to Detroit in 1957 due to the hostility she received for her act of courage. The Edmund Pettus Bridge became a symbol of very significant changes taking place in Alabama, and throughout America for that matter. And on March the 7th of 1965, it became known as Bloody Sunday when voting rights members were violently confronted by law enforcement officers. But under court protection, on March 21st, 3,200 marchers crossed this Edmund Pettus Bridge and headed out of Selma to Montgomery. By the time they reached Montgomery on March 25th, they numbered about 25,000. Less than 5 months later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Acts Right of 1965. The Creek War of 1813 and 1814 began as a civil war between the Creek Indians in both the upper and lower towns who were friendly toward the United States, fighting against a faction of the Creek Indians of the upper towns who were hostile toward the Americans. Those hostile were called the Red Sticks because they used war clubs which were painted red. The Red Stick Creeks had been influenced back in 1811 by an outspoken Shawnee Indian military leader named Tecumseh when he visited the Southeast to plead with them to return to their ancient traditions and drive the Americans away from their ancestral lands. In July of 1813, a Mississippi territorial militia ambushed a group of the Red Sticks as they were returning from Pensacola with Spanish ammunition and supplies. 1 month later, the Red Sticks retaliated by killing 250 Creek and American settlers at Fort Mims, referred to as the Fort Mims Massacre. This event brought a prominent young politician and military leader into the picture when he was appointed to lead a Tennessee state militia into the Alabama region. The man's name was Andrew Jackson. His combined force included about 500 Cherokee warriors and about 100 Lower Creek warriors for a total of about 3,300 men. Jackson's plan was to attack a refuge of Red Stick Indians in a defensive position of a big horseshoe-shaped bend in the Tallapoosa River. Meanwhile, the respected Red Stick war leader named Manawa waited in the bend with about 1,000 warriors and at least 350 women and children. The people from several small villages had gathered here to construct a temporary village for protection. They called their village Tohopeka, which consisted of about 300 log houses in which they had been working for several months to build. Additionally, they had constructed an impressive dirt and log barricade across the narrow part of the Big Horseshoe Bend. Even so, it was still about 400 yards long. A tremendous amount of labor had gone into the enterprise by the Red Sticks. They hoped to defend any attack in this fortified place surrounded by the river on one side and the barricade on the other, or at least to allow the women and the children and the older men to escape by way of the river. At 6:30 a.m., Jackson divided his army, who were camped about 6 miles from the bend. About 1,300 of the men, under the command of General John Coffee, were to cross the river 2.5 miles downstream and then guard the river bank's outside bend, keeping Tohopeka surrounded. Meanwhile, Jackson's best remaining 2,000 men marched directly toward the barricade with plans to blow holes in it with the cannons. Only about a third of the Red Stick warriors had a musket or rifle. During the noise of the cannon fire, 3 of General Coffee's Cherokee warriors, led by one of them called the Whale, slipped into the river, swam across, and stole some canoes which were then used to transport others quietly across the river, where they then set fire to the village of Tohopeka. Jackson saw the smoke rising. Knowing that the Red Sticks were surrounded, he then launched the attack forward. The fighting was brutal, and many Red Sticks tried to escape by swimming the river, but were shot before reaching the shore. After nearly 6 hours of battle, before darkness fell on that sad day, more than 800 Red Stick warriors were dead, and Jackson had 49 men killed and 154 hurting with wounds. 350 women and children of the Red Sticks became prisoners of the Cherokee and the Lower Creek Indians. Chief Manawa was said to have been wounded 7 times that day, and by his own account he lay still among those dead until nightfall, when he crawled down to the river, climbed into a canoe, and disappeared into the darkness. Manawa continued to live along the Tallapoosa River as a respected leader for about another 22 years before being forced to relocate to Indian Territory in Oklahoma during the Trail of Tears migration. William McIntosh was a strong supporter of General Andrew Jackson in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. He was a skilled orator and a politician, and a very wealthy planter and a slave owner who owned several slaves. He also owned an inn and a ferry business. William McIntosh had 3 wives. His first wife was half Scottish and half Creek. His second wife was a full Cherokee. And his elevated social and tribal status allowed him to take a third wife, and she was half Creek and half Cherokee. McIntosh signed the Treaty of Indian Springs in 1825, which ceded all of the Creek Indian lands east of the Chattahoochee River to Georgia and Alabama. A police force called the Lawmenders deemed that to be a capital crime. Manawa himself and 120 to 150 lawmenders attacked McIntosh's plantation. They set his house on fire. McIntosh was wounded by gunfire and was pulled from his burning house and stabbed in the heart. Other Creek Indians shot him more than 50 times. McIntosh's oldest son escaped by diving through a window. His wives asked for a suit of clothes for his burial, but the killers insisted upon throwing his naked body into an unmarked grave. That grave and a replica of his home is now in Whitesburg, Georgia. Creek Indians also inhabited this area before being removed to Oklahoma following the Creek Indian War. William and Thomas Lundy were the first white pioneers to settle here, and a trading post was opened in the 1830s to serve those who were searching for gold. It was called Lundy's Crossroads, and it became known as County Line in 1856 whenever a post office was established. Corn and cotton were the principal crops, and Confederate money became useless by the end of the Civil War, and the area suffered several hardships. The name County Line was then changed to Lineville in 1870, becoming the county seat of recently formed Clay County. This gentleman, who is cleaning up and restoring this historic home where he parks his antique car, also has an interesting feature in back of his yard. It's a rare concrete water tower constructed in 1917, one of only 2 known to still exist. It stands 100 feet tall and held 75,000 gallons of water.